So what I recommend, whatever university you determine to choose, whether it's CSU or somewhere else, contact the office that handles their residency and work with them to determine either your status and/or how to change it. So the difference between a resident and non-resident in graduate school for this year is $16,000 essentially. So it's $34,000 for a student who's a resident student in their cost of attendance and $50,000 for a non-resident student. The biggest difference is in the tuition and fees. If you notice, for a resident, it's $15,130, and for a non-resident, it's $30,858. Almost all of the other components in the cost of attendance are the same outside of the transportation costs. That one is a little bit higher for non-resident students with the assumption that they might have to fly home throughout the academic year. Now, this cost of attendance is based off of a whole academic year at CSU as a full-time student. So that's 9 credits in fall, 9 credits in spring. This is just a base outline. Sometimes your cost of attendance can include other components like your program fees, differential tuition, miscellaneous expenses, and loan origination fees. So it can be more than this, but this is at least, I think, helpful for you all to see the differences between the two. I mention it because if you are a non-resident and you're like, I cannot afford $50,000, then it's important to know what it means to become a resident, especially here at CSU or just in Colorado in general. If you all are pursuing graduate school at CSU, that means as soon as you're admitted into the program or begin the program, that means you're qualified to petition. Normally, you're not qualified as an undergrad if you're younger than, I believe, 23, if you're not married, or if you're not financially emancipated. So for the most part, most normal college age students in their undergrad are not eligible to petition unless a parent moves here as well. So I'm letting you all know that as soon as you become a graduate student at CSU, you are qualified to petition a year later. It takes a year. So the petition requirements. This is a lot of information, but I think it's helpful because so many people make such of an assumption and then they end up having to pay $16,000 more. And I would hate for that to happen to you all. So essentially, as soon as you're qualified to petition, you need to establish domicile, which means physically living in Colorado for 12 full months consecutively. Like you couldn't go back home to, I don't know, Alabama for 6 months and then come back and be like, I'm qualified. You have to live here for 12 full months. Number 2, you have to establish your legal ties in Colorado. You're making the impression that Colorado is going to become your permanent resident, whether or not CSU was here. And so you have to establish those legal ties. So your Colorado driver's license, your Colorado vehicle registration, and your Colorado voter registration. Once you have all 4 of those in place for at least 12 months, you're then eligible to petition. So if you start your grad program in fall of 2022, I recommend you move here at least before August 15th of August 15th of 2022. That way, August 15th of 2023, starting your second year, you're then eligible to petition and potentially can change from a non-resident to a resident student at CSU. But it is pretty likely if you're a non-resident, starting off your grad program, you're going to have 1 full year of non-resident rate, and then your second year, you'll begin the resident rate. There's also additional information that you can submit and quite a bit of information on our website. I highly recommend that you all look at that if you are trying to become a resident at not at CSU, but in Colorado, because you do have to attend an orientation to get certain forms to fill out to get to us. It's not just you submitting random documentation. It's like a pretty thorough process, not necessarily under CSU's control. It's based off of the Colorado state statute that determines these requirements. We just have to abide by them. Also, if you are a veteran, you can complete a different petition. It's called the GI Promise, and that actually waives the 12-month requirement as long as you have domicile and legal ties literally the day before CSU starts classes. You can get in-state residency, so it's pretty awesome if you have that identity. Do you have any questions about residency? I know that one is a lot of questions for students most of the time. Okay, cool. Starting the financial aid process, of course, begins with the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Students apply through studentaid.gov. It's an annual process. Every single year you're a graduate student, you need to complete this process if you want to be reviewed and considered for grants and loans, as well as potentially work study. For this next academic year, 2022-2023, the FAFSA is already open. It opened up on October 1st. It is recommended that you complete it at least by March 1st, but we will accept them afterwards. It could just have implications on potential scholarship eligibility if you don't have that FAFSA done by March 1st. So make sure to remember that date. Also, as a graduate student, you are considered independent for FAFSA purposes, which means you only include your income on the FAFSA instead of your parents. So sometimes that could mean, obviously excluding a lot of income information. I think I already talked about the dates, but at CSU, it's March 1st, but if you're applying to other universities, you might want to find out if it has an earlier date. That way you make sure to abide by what that university has in place. So always be on top of all of that. Oh, I also should mention, it always goes 2 years back for taxes, so prior years. So if the academic year starts in 2022, that means we're asking for 2020 income information for yourself. Next, we'll talk about types of financial aid, which will include grants, scholarships, work study, and student loans. Grants is gift aid that does not need to be repaid back, and it's typically based off of documented financial need from the FAFSA. Unfortunately, there's very limited resources for graduate students here at Colorado State University. There really is one grant. It's called the Colorado Graduate Grant. That one is only awarded to students first come, first serve who have a 0 EFC. Who knows what EFC stands for? Cool. So it stands for Expected Family Contribution. It is a number calculated by the FAFSA using your income, your investment net worth, how big your family is, and how many in your family are in college that are children. And so it uses all that information to compute this number. And that number is oftentimes used by universities, specifically undergrads, to determine what type of financial aid and how much. The real benefit or importance of it for graduate students is that 0 EFC. So if you have a $100, or not $100, but a 100 EFC, you're automatically ineligible for the Colorado Graduate Grant. Even if you have a 0 EFC, but you submit the FAFSA much later, that could mean that all the funds were already exhausted by other students with the EFC that's a 0 that submitted their FAFSA much earlier. So that's another piece of submitting it as soon as possible. I also think it's important to mention a lot of students get the Pell Grant as an undergrad. That grant is actually not applicable as a graduate student, so know that not to expect that in graduate school. Yeah.
Is it like specific to any types of graduate program, or any types of graduate program would be awarded to any types of program?
It's any student first come, first serve who has a 0 EFC.
Can you restate the question? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I believe you asked, does it matter what like graduate program you're in to qualify for the Colorado Graduate Grant? And the answer is no. As long as you're a graduate student with a 0 EFC and one of the people who submit the FAFSA before the funds are exhausted, you would be awarded. Cool. Any other questions about grants? I'll just assume that you all are going to jump in if you do have questions. Okay, so next, I feel like I missed a slide. Yep. Okay, scholarships. There's scholarships offered by the university, which are through the CSU Essay or the CSU Scholarship application, or you can also apply for external scholarships from different organizations and companies. For CSU, the CSU Scholarship application is found on RamWeb, and it has the same exact deadlines as the FAFSA. So it is already open as of October 1st, and that one is a hard deadline of March 1st. If you call in and on March 2nd say, oh my gosh, I forgot to submit it, there will be no changes that can happen. So make sure that March 1st deadline, you have that CSU Essay in. There's also an external website link on our website, financialaid@colostate.edu, that has a link of all the vetted external scholarships that we know of. It is pretty robust. I think it gets updated closer to November, but I recommend students use that to search for outside scholarships in addition to other like websites that you can have access to, like FAFSA.com. Also check with your academic department as well. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the CSU Essay. So we talked about the dates, but what I wanted to mention is that it is highly competitive because all CSU students, undergrad and grad, for the most part, know about the CSU Essay. I personally recommend students to work on that over like the Thanksgiving break or even the winter break, since it's not due until March 1st, and actually put intentional effort into it. It's not something that you're going to complete in a day or maybe even a weekend. It's something that you should be spending quite a bit of time on just to fine tune and make it an exceptional essay. It does include merit-based and need-based scholarships, but if you do not have your FAFSA in by March 1st, you will not be reviewed for need-based scholarships with the CSU Essay. So that's again why I reiterate March 1st, both for the FAFSA and the CSU Essay. There are 3 parts to the CSU Essay. Most students only do step 1. If you have time, I would recommend to do all 3. So step 1 is a general essay. That's where it just essentially asks, why did you choose CSU? What are your interests? What do you plan to pursue with this degree? That's the process where it sends that essay to a handful of scholarships. It can be anywhere from 10 to 20, even more, based off of your eligibility. It uses like all of your identifying information, like your GPA and your major and all those different things to send off that one essay to dozens of scholarships. Step 2 is a supplemental essay that will be specifically with your college or department, and it'll be a more specific question, but same thing. Once you submit that, it gets sent off to another different handful of scholarships. So you can be literally applying for dozens of scholarships just based off of 2 essays, compared to external scholarships where each one is probably different. Last, there is a search engine where you can type in certain like identifying information about you, like social justice or rodeo or tennis or legacy or alumni, and find specific scholarships that you have yet to apply for through the first 2 essays and apply for those individually. Most students who do all 3 steps are typically the students who get scholarships, but that's not like statistically supported. I guess that's just what I've seen. The students who put in more effort obviously are more likely to get the scholarships. Now, about writing the essays, number 1, make sure it's grammatically correct. So not only spell check, but potentially also having people review your essay. Answer the actual essay prompt. I've seen students who just like, looks like they copy and paste their resume of all the things that they've done in high school and college without actually answering the prompt. So that's pretty hard to recommend for a scholarship. And the most important thing is to make yourself memorable. I'm literally reading through hundreds of essays. If every single one of them sounds the same, like, oh, I just want to help people and I will have a passion for this and I love like meeting the need of people, like that's not original. Like why? Like what kind of need do you want to help with? Like what exactly do you want to help people with in their life? Like why did you choose social justice or why did you choose economics? Like what kind of impact? Exactly. Like sharing a story about yourself that makes you stand out and be unique. I read an essay. I don't know how many I've read that like say, I'm in equine science because I love horses. And that's like honestly as deep as it gets with their essays versus students who say, I love horses and equine science, but it is because my grandpa owned a farm. And when I was 2, he started helping me learn how to, I don't even know anything about horses, but essentially all the details about what the student did. And it went into like extreme detail about experiences. And that was an easy approval of sending them over to potentially get awarded. So sharing the story is super important. And that is open for graduate students as well. I do want to mention that graduate students are typically more likely to get a scholarship from the CSU Essay, especially compared to like first-time freshmen, just because of the experience of writing essays over your like undergrad degree. So keep that in mind that it's pretty a good chance and it is still in competitive scholarships. Student employment. Students can be offered work study as graduate students. That work study award is typically about $4,500 for the academic year. So it's split half in fall, half in spring. You do have to demonstrate financial need from the FAFSA. And if you don't show financial needs, you can submit something called request to work study. And that is open May of 2022, typically at the very first Monday of May. So that's for students who have no need. They could still find a way to get a work study award. Work study jobs can be both on and off campus, but I've noticed that less graduate students get work study than I expect. Not exactly sure why, but if you don't get awarded, contact our office and we'll say, oh, yeah, you actually do have a need. We can add that onto you, or no, you don't. Do the request work study. It might be helpful to at least ask if you are interested in the position. If you don't have work study, you can always find an on-campus student hourly job or off-campus hourly jobs. You can search for jobs on RamWeb. I'm sure all of you have seen like Handshake through RamWeb, the student employment section. That is the same place you would search for jobs here at CSU. Student loans. The majority of graduate students pay for CSU through student loans. Let me give you an example. Let's say your program was $40,000 a year here at CSU. What I see most often is first, you'll be offered an unsubsidized loan for $20,500. That is the max you can get in an unsub loan as a graduate student in 1 year. But then the remaining amount, the $19,500, will be covered by the Graduate Plus loan. So you will be offered enough exactly to cover your entire cost of attendance for the year. So all those tuition and fees, rent and food, books and supplies, transportation costs, personal costs, all of that. Now, that does not necessarily mean you have to accept either or both of the loans. I do see some students who say, well, I'm working part-time, I'm paying for my own rent and food, so I really only need to accept a portion of the unsubsidized loan to pay off just my tuition and fees. That's okay. I meet other students who say, well, I stopped working full-time. Like, the only way I'm going to be able to pay for rent and food is through getting a refund from CSU for my financial aid. So those students oftentimes would accept the full $40,000 of their loans to be able to get a refund check and eventually pay for the rent and food. So for the unsubsidized loan, that accrues interest as soon as it's paid. The current interest rate is 5.28%, but it will change for the next academic year. And again, the limit is $20,500. The Graduate Plus loan, same thing, it accrues interest as soon as it's paid. It is 1% more of an interest rate, so 6.28%. Again, it'll change for next year. That is awarded to cover the difference between the unsub loan, other financial aid, all the way up to your cost of attendance. And that one does require a credit check, so it's not guaranteed. If you pass the credit check, cool, you get it. If you don't, then you might have to find other options as far as loans or ways to pay for CSU. Just like an undergrad, the loans are in deferment, which essentially means you do not have to begin paying them back until either you graduate or fall below half-time credits, which should be less than 5 credits as a graduate student. So as long as you're in 5, you're good to go. If you're in 4 or anything less, you will have to start paying those loans back. Also, after you graduate, it is 6 months after before you have to start paying them back. So keep that in mind that you do have this grace period to kind of find a job. Okay. Students without documentation. Oh, saw hand.
Yes, thanks, Stephanie.
Well, if you have a documented disability and you need to go part-time.
Yeah, if you're in at least 5 credits, you still get those forms of financial aid. But unfortunately, with federal financial aid, it's not as lenient as with CSU financial aid. So as an undergrad student who has a specific grant that requires them to be in 12 credits, if they ended up being in 9, they would still get a prorated amount of that grant. Unfortunately, as I said, as a graduate student, it's really just those 2 loans, and they're federal loans. So it is pretty strict. You have to be in at least 5 credits, which is part-time. 5 credits is part-time, 9 credits is full-time. So as long as you're in 5, you could be offered financial aid. If you're in 4 or less, it's either private loans or paying out of pocket. Anyone else? Did that answer your question? Cool. Okay. So students without documentation may also be eligible for assistantships and CSU scholarships. So the CSU Essay is still an option. They can apply for private outside scholarships as well as private outside loans. But with the loans, they do have to have a U.S. citizen or permanent resident as a co-signer. I also did recently get an email that there is a new loan called the Dreamer Graduate School Loan Program. So if anyone thinks that they qualify, I would really recommend to look into that. And then students who qualify for Colorado Asset can also receive in-state tuition, which means they would get that $34,000 in cost of attendance versus the $50,000. Additional resources. A lot of these are not really associated with our office, but I at least wanted to mention them for you to look into. Fellowships are specifically with your academic department. So whatever degree you end up pursuing at whatever school, contact the department and see if they offer fellowships or assistantships. If you also do anything like AmeriCorps, Teach for America, or Peace Corps, they do offer stipends to help you pay towards your tuition once you return to school. You can also connect with your employer if you are working part or full-time and see if they have any sort of assistance. I do chat with a lot of students who will like take 1 class at a time and their employer will pay for it at the end of the semester. If one doesn't exist, contact your employer about creating one, because maybe that will be the beginning of that option for not only you, but other employees. And then also, if you have any sort of military ties, you could potentially get the GI Bill to also help towards your graduate school tuition and fee charges. I just want to note that they all impact financial aid though. So if your cost of attendance was $40,000 and you were getting like a stipend from your employer for 10,000, then that means your loan eligibility would increase by 10,000. You wouldn't be able to have like $40,000 in loans and $10,000 in a scholarship, because then both together would be exceeding your cost of attendance. So it always does, all of your financial aid have to fit within your cost of attendance. I actually get that question a lot too. Students are like, well, I want $50,000 of loans, but it's like, your cost of attendance is only 30,000. It's a student loan. It can't like go to meeting other needs outside of the cost of attendance. So always keep that in mind. The last slide is assistantships. That is when a student is employed by the academic department and probably the form of support that I see the most outside of financial aid. Compensation is different per department, but sometimes it could be paying your full tuition or even a percentage of your tuition. It could provide you a monthly stipend for hours that you work. It can also provide the removal of the health insurance. So you still have health insurance coverage, but then they pay for it or the graduate school pays for it. But for sure, check with your academic department and graduate school for the requirements on both of those. But I do see those probably the most often. Awesome. So if you all decide to come to CSU and you have an interest in a program here, I recommend to contact our office after you're offered financial aid if you have any questions. That typically happens in December or January, as long as you're admitted to the program and everything. But yeah, I think it's best to talk with our office, especially if there's any issues or confusion or concerns. Like, that's what we're here for. We're the experts in financial aid. So always know that you can contact our office. And if it's something we can help you with, awesome. If it's not, then we'll let you know where to get directed to. I should mention the forms, how to contact us. Number one, our website is crazy informative, and I also find a lot of students have trouble finding the exact information they want. So if you do experience that, you can email us. If you don't need an immediate response, definitely do that. You can call our office. Typically, I find that students have the best luck not having a huge wait time if they call around like 9 a.m. on the dot. I have had a student call that said she called at 9:15 and had to wait for 45 minutes. So I think that means a bunch of people are calling us at once. We also offer virtual appointments. Typically, we hold a couple appointments a day. So we will post like 3 appointments each day in the afternoon, just so you can actually get a same day appointment. And we are physically in the office, but we're also working hybrid. So there's only a very few amount of people in the office. So if like 3 or 4 come in the hour, we'd be fine to manage that. But if 100 students came in, there's no way we'd be able to see you by the end of the day. So that is an option, but most of the time we refer students to do the virtual appointments. Awesome, that's the end of my presentation. Do you all have any questions?
Do folks via Zoom who are here have any questions for Brandy?
We had a question over here.
The residency process, is that typical for each state?
No, every state is different. There's some states where the person's like, I just moved here, I'm already a resident, cool, I get the resident rate. Colorado is considered one of the stricter states. It is super thorough. I've had people who submit all of the documentation, but actually don't attend the orientation or get the actual petition form, and they're shocked when they don't get residency status. It is so strict. So that's why I recommend to review our website. And I love talking to students through exactly what to do. Sometimes I'll talk with students like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be a resident for sure. So I'm like, oh, when did you move here? The requirement is August 15th. And they're like, oh, I moved here December. And I'm like, this means that you now have to wait 12 months from December before you're eligible. I've even had people who have their children move to Colorado, like their junior year of high school, believing that by the time they graduate, they'll be able to be a resident, not realizing that students younger than 23 are not qualified to petition. And so they lost a whole year with their daughter by not calling our office or checking out our website. So I get a lot of devastation. For sure. Any other questions? Yeah.
Did your PMD said it wasn't listening?
Are you kidding or serious this time?
Oh, I'm kidding.
Good. Any other questions? Well, financial aid is complex. It's not easy. So again, call us if you decide to come to CSU. That is our area of expertise, and we'd be happy to support you. Did anyone virtually have questions?
We don't have any questions in the chat at the moment. And folks are also welcome to unmute themselves via Zoom because we have a speaker that everyone can here for folks who are in attendance. So please post questions or unmute yourself if you have any. I don't think we have any for now.
Cool. I can elaborate on things if you would like. Unless you're good.
I guess like what are some, oh, thank you. Sorry, okay. What's like a big piece that you want students to know about loans that I know wasn't mentioned? I know you talked pretty like thoroughly through it, but what's just like a tip for folks or things to remember about like loans specifically?
I see some students who just like assume they need the full loan amount, so they accept the full 40,000 or 50,000 or however much their program is, and sometimes they get really huge refund checks. And they're like, oh, cool, I'm gonna go spend this on this, and that, and like super excited about it. It's really intended for the cost of attendance, so the tuition fees, rent and food, books and supplies, personal expenses, transportation costs. And so if you calculate the numbers, that's what I really recommend, is to say, okay, this is how much my tuition is, my like actual balance with CSU. And this is how much I'm gonna need to survive with rent, food, and maybe a little bit of cushion money, except the amount that you actually need versus the full amount, because these loans accrue interest. So if you take out 20,500 now, 5 years from now, it's gonna be more than that. And so I've even met students who are like, I'm gonna take out the full amount, I'm gonna get this big refund check, and I'm gonna put it in like stocks and bonds so it can continue to grow. Who knows if they're gonna make money off it or lose money, but essentially they're still going to be charged interest that accrues over time. So no matter what happens, they're going to have to pay us back plus more. And so I think some students are just super hesitant and they want to make sure they're covered. And I think it is best to call our office if you don't feel comfortable calculating that yourself, just to get a true idea of how much you do need. Yeah.
Are your loans accruing interest if they're in deferment?
Yes. The only loan does not, oh, I'll repeat the question.
Yeah.
Are your loans accruing interest while in deferment? And the answer was yes. The only loans that do not accrue interest while you're in school is a subsidized loan, which is not for graduate students, and health and professions loan, which is more for med students. But unsubsidized loans and graduate plus loans, although you don't have to pay them back right away, do begin accruing interest. So there are some students who will just monthly pay off the interest that's accruing over the 4, 2, 3, however many years they're in college. Then when they graduate, the loan is still truly only 20,500 because they've been paying off the interest, which I do recommend if you could afford to do so. But it doesn't necessarily make sense to use like your refund money to pay off the loan that you took out.
I think a big important piece to know for folks who have loans, if you're going into graduate school, even if it's getting deferred, like make sure you have an account for your loan provider ready before you graduate, so you know like where to find your account, how much is the interest if you're not planning on paying it right away. You just need to make sure that you're tracking that stuff, because we'll take out loans, we'll wait until we graduate, maybe we took out a loan our first year and we're like in our 4th year, we're like, I don't know who my loan provider is, I don't know how much I took out, how much interest have I accrued. If you have federal loans, federal student aid tracks your entire loan history. So make sure you always log into federal student aid to track your federal loans. If you have private loans, you'll have a loan provider, and federal student aid will have all your loan provider information, the total amount that you took out that 1 year, how much your interest rate is for each one. So make sure you're tracking that information now so that you're not graduating and forgetting like, what was that information? I don't know what that is, and losing track of that.
That happens all the time. I had a student call and she was like, I got contacted by my loan service, a loan servicer, and they said I had a $3,500 loan, but I never took out a loan, I swear. Obviously, I have access to her financial aid and I clearly see she took out a loan, and she even had communication with our office multiple times about the loan. It's just been 4 years and it's hard to remember. So after informing her about that, of course, she realized the emails that she was getting were actually accurate and was going to begin paying them back. So it is hard to keep track, but Deanna's right. On studentaid.gov, after you log in with your FSA ID, you can see your loan history, the interest that's accruing, your loan servicer, and how to contact them if needed.
I'll add something too. One thing that I know from close friends experiences, not personal experience, is that, as Brandy said, you don't have to take out the full amount of loan that you're awarded, right? So let's say you're in a situation where you go into a graduate program and they're offering you tuition assistance, right? You're getting some type of financial support to cover your program, your tuition. But your student fees are gonna have to come out of your pocket, and you're like, I don't have that much money right now. Maybe getting, or like looking at loans as an option to cover that specific amount might be important too, right? So again, you don't have to get $40,000-$50,000 out of loans, but you're like, okay, roughly for a whole year, my student fees are gonna be like $2,000-$3,000. I don't know. CSU is pretty expensive, I think, for student fees. So just keeping that in mind too, like what do you actually need? And knowing that also you can start paying your loans off while you're a student, like slowly. You don't have to wait until you graduate. Some students think that they have to. You don't have to. For some people, it makes sense to start putting some of that money away. And for others, they're like, nope, I'm just not in a financial place to be paying off that money right now. So I'm just going to use my funds for my current needs as well. So just other things to keep in mind.
Yeah, and always remember that it's, like, let's say you are 3,000 short for fall after like an assistantship or whatever type of financial aid you're getting. And so you're like, okay, well, I only need 3,000 in loans for fall. You would then want to accept potentially 6,000 because 3,000 will help towards fall, and you'll likely have a similar amount remaining balance for spring. Or you can contact our office too, and we can kind of like finagle with your financial aid and make it so where you're only accepting a fall portion, and then in spring you can only accept a spring portion if you're like nervous about, well, I don't know if it's going to be 3,000 in fall. What if it's more? What if it's less? I want it to be exact. You can always contact our office and we can make changes to make most sense for you.
Any other questions from folks in the room for Brandy? We're ahead of schedule. Brandy, are you okay hanging out for a little bit? Since we have a little bit of time, folks, please feel free to take a break, bathroom break before our next session at 2, which will be in 2 different rooms. And feel free to connect with Brandy or any of us if you have questions. And I'll stay on the Zoom account as well if folks have questions for Brandy. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Brandy.
That was like so much easier.
That one's really good.
I had a presentation a month ago, I think, and I had to talk so loud. My voice just doesn't get
This
loud.
is capturing your audio, just so you know. Just in case you're like wanting, just so you know.
Anyways,
There's so
I started coughing hysterically and couldn't stop for a little bit.
ouch, that's painful.
The masks don't help. Like it
Yeah,
just dries
it's a
stuff up, right? And you're trying to like be louder.
Mhm.
This one's not as loud.
Oh, that one, yeah.
This one, so we can control the volume actually through the little.
Oh, we should.
Yeah.
That's where it's at.
Mhm.
So that is.
Oh, granite. Yes. She just has an internet card.
Yeah,
And that's her like 40 USB drive.
So you're not just freaking out. I might personally.
Like they're currently. So the thing that I joke about is that we're equipped